What is it about culture, fear in organizations that maybe hinder people getting the best out of their people?
There are 3 core cognitive processes involved in creativity, and pretty much every human has them.
People come in and they're like terrified to put themselves out there and share anything because they don't want to be wrong. And that really shows up when you're doing innovation and creative work.
Fun fact for everyone here is that there's actually no such thing as being right-brained or left-brained.
That's because I always think about how human beings have this amazing capacity for imagination, unlike any other species.
I'm not creative. I think people associate the word creative with art.
It's so simple but incredibly powerful to just own that and apologize. It is unbelievably relieving, and it's hard to change an overall organizational culture. But as a leader, even with a team, can you create a safe bubble, a container where you can start to dissipate it and start to bring that out in the people just in your sphere of influence?
Welcome to Breaking the Chain, brought to you by Impel Talent. I'm Nathaniel Chapman.
And I'm Terentia, Browne. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Breaking the Chain. We are really excited. We've got guests in the studio with us today, and we're going to be talking about the fear behind innovation. I think there's a lot of people that accepted our invites to this topic. I think it's something that a lot of people may be thinking about or actually experiencing. So we're really excited to hear from the guests that we have. And so you're going to hear about them in just a little bit. But maybe just to set up the episode for everyone listening, I think we've put together, what we're going to talk about today. But I think for us, why we wanted to have this conversation is, many organizations say they want innovation. I've worked in engineering. There's so many, we do crowdsourcing of ideas. We want people to give ideas, but a lot of people hesitate to act on those ideas because, they often very much blocked by fear, they blocked by hierarchy, or even by the uncertainty that's happening around us. And so even though the organizations may be talking about innovation is a priority for them, we often see people hesitating to take some action or to actually explore these different ideas because I think they're afraid if they fail, what may happen or what would people say. And so we'd love to just unpack that a little bit. And so we'd love to introduce our 2 guests, Richard and Tessa, and then we can get started.
I'm so excited for this topic, Terentia. This has been really neat. I actually was reached out to by one of our 2 guests, and I was really excited to finally put this episode together. We're joined by Richard Braden, who's founder of People Rocket LLC, a strategic innovation firm in San Francisco. He has 15 years in design thinking, leadership, and is an innovation educator, teaches at Harvard, Stanford, Alto and London Business School, advises major organizations. He's worked across Airbnb, Google, UN, Microsoft, Starbucks, and Coca-Cola. So we're really excited to have you here. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you. It's great to be here. So excited.
Very excited to have you on. Fellow improv interest in, and we've got Tessa Forshaw, Dr. Forshaw. Sorry if I missed a doctor for you, Richard. Founding scholar at Harvard's Next Level Lab, focusing on cognitive science of work, learning, and innovation. She's an expert in turning cognitive science plus design into practical workspace tools. Also teaches design at Stanford and Harvard, and we're a winner of multiple awards, including Fast Company Design Award, Core 77 Awards, and Australian American Chamber of Commerce Innovation Award. So we have 2 people in the studio that are going to be amazing to talk around innovation. And I hope I did your introductions at least a little bit of justice.
I mean, you definitely missed the most important of my credentials, according to my 5-year-old, which is that mama's tall enough to reach the treat box. So, I think that's my number 1 credential at the moment.
You got to take the ones that are the big important ones for sure.
Yeah, I do.
You guys both get to work in pretty incredibly creative people, and obviously have had the chance to see innovation at its highest. Why do you think so many people hesitate to bring ideas forward? When we talked about this episode and the fear of elements, what do you think it is that allows people to hesitate and not throw themselves into it.
We talk about in the work that we've developed and in the book a concept of innovation hesitation specific to innovation. And there's really three main components, and I'll let Tessa sort of dig into some underneath what the mechanisms are. But the three primary things are, one, there's this mythology about what innovation is and who does it that is out there. And you see it in movies and books and things that says, oh, it's got to be, these few rare people in the right kind of clothes that come up with billion-dollar companies. And the reality is is innovation, but it is far from the majority. The majority is much smaller and day-to-day. The second piece is that there is this creativity gap that many people don't consider themselves creative, even though they can demonstrate that they are. And, young kids definitely say they're creative. Tessa's 5-year-old that she mentioned is unbelievably creative. But as adults, it sort of gets stripped away and social dynamics kick in. And so we feel like maybe I'm not creative. People don't put their hands up if you asked, are you creative? And the third piece being this cognitive caution, hey, it's new. I'm going to hold back. I'm going to keep myself safe. And I saw this in improv, teaching beginning improvisers. People come in and they're like terrified to put themselves out there and share anything because they don't want to be wrong. And that really shows up when you're doing innovation and creative work. But it's not just that we've seen it in practice. There's also some principles underneath it in cognitive science that underlie all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the most important things to acknowledge in this moment is also that all of that innovation hesitation is kind of really normal and aligned to a lot of the beliefs and perspectives that we have about how our brain works, but also just a result of our ancestral evolution. So starting with this idea of the mythology, it's really common for us to assign roles in social groups to folks, especially when we have strong mental models around what something exists like. We want to prioritize social cohesion and staying as part of the tribe, because if we don't stay part of the tribe, that meant that we, got left behind by ourselves, and that probably wasn't so great for our survival. So it makes a lot of sense that we tend to align to these core mythologies and beliefs as a way of making sense to things and perpetuating that. And the creativity gap is such a fascinating one, I find, because it sort of relates this idea of who is creative and who's allowed to have creativity. When you actually look at the cognitive science of it, a fun fact for everyone here is that there's actually no such thing as being right-brained or left-brained. In cognitive science, we call that personality-based hemispheric dominance, and it's a complete myth. And if you don't want to take my word for it, you can take the dozens of universities and the hundreds of researchers behind them who studied tens of thousands of fMRIs, and they found absolutely no evidence that people are either right-brained or left-brained, unless there was some kind of atypical disorder going on or situation. And they certainly have not found that the right brain is associated with creativity and the left brain with analytics. I think a really great way to think about that is if you think about like really creative activities out there, like for me, I love the ballet. And so choreography comes to mind. Choreography looks very creative, but that's actually incredibly analytical. You have to think about pacing and timing and beats and spatial movements. And if you have multiple people, you have to think about all of those things in concert with one another, and the pace at which someone moves across the stage, and that they don't run into somebody else, and that this angle gets that, like this particular thing that they need, and team dynamics. And there's so much analysis in that. On the flip side, I mean, Rich, you often tell that story of Apollo 13. It's Apollo 13, right?
Apollo 13, yeah.
Yeah.
Unlucky 13.
Unlucky 13, where all the CO2 scrubber failed, and all of the engineers on the ground got together and they got given all of the objects that were in the space capsule, and it got said to them, you need to figure out how to make a CO2 scrap by using what we have. And they came up with heaps of different prototypes that could have worked, and they found one that was the best. But that process of like having all of these objects in front of them and then rapidly prototyping and coming up with hypotheses and making leaps and trying different things out and seeing what happened, like that's very creative. So it's actually really hard to pull those apart.
You know, you said something that I thought was really interesting, because I think creativity, everybody has it in them. And I think everyone wants to lean into doing something creative. You know, I find that definitely with managing people over the years, that I find people lean into projects where they can do something that's a bit creative, especially if they have the ability, you know, whether it's like an article, if they're in sales, or some, you know, just something to kind of challenge them differently. And I certainly feel it. I think when you create something or build something, there must be an impact on the cognitive level of, you've thought of this, you've brought it to life, dopamine get released, or reward chemicals reward you, because I tend to find people want to lean in that direction. And I love that you brought it into anthropology, Tessa, because I always think about how human beings have this amazing capacity for imagination, unlike any other species. And it seems a shame that people don't get a chance to use that in the work environment, or could feel stifled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, just springboarding on that, I think often organizations and their structure are set up in this is broadly, one of two ways. They either help to dissipate innovation hesitation and create an environment where it can thrive and people feel okay doing it, or they amplify the hesitation. So roles, I'm not defined as an innovative role. So there's no structure for how innovation happens here, and I'm trying to do something new. So the ambiguity goes way up. And then I if I'm going to do that, I don't feel like I'm the person. I'm socially exposed to be evaluated, which then makes it more ambiguous, and it just sort of builds. And if we can turn that around and suppress that and start to take it away, create that environment, that really helps. And it's hard to change an overall organizational culture. But as a leader, even with a team, can you create a safe bubble, a container where you can start to dissipate it and start to bring that out in the people just in your sphere of influence? And if you're at the top, try to do it in a bigger way. But you can enact it as an individual, but you can also enact it with a team as a participant or as a leader.
I'd like to just add to that. Coming from the manufacturing space, the engineering space, I always hear people say, I'm not creative. And, you know, I say to them, I play the piano, I bake, I paint, not so well, but I do all these things. And they're like, well, I'm not creative. And I said, who said that to you? Why do you think that way? Because the engineering designs you are doing is creativity, right? And so I think people associate the word creative with art, or, you know, and so when we talk about this technical space, they don't see themselves as being creative, and very much so talk about the left brain, right brain. So Tessa, thank you for like just busting that myth for everybody and just letting everybody take a bit of a deep breath, because I think this narrative needs to change, that, you know, I am creative. I'm creative in a different way to my colleague, but I am creative.
It's such an interesting point, this idea of artistic versus creative, because I was thinking, so the background here is I was watching a friend of mine paint a replica of a painting, and it was like identical. And I sort of had this question to myself of like, you're artistically very gifted. Are you creative though? Like, is replicating something that exists in front of you exactly, is playing a piece of music with the exact precision of how it is written and not making it your own, is it artistic and not creative? And I was at South by Southwest last week, or the week before, and I had this amazing opportunity actually to sit in a session that was at Antone's, which is this like music venue that's sort of a long history of blues musicians. And is, I think, a vibrant place of, you know, communities of practice of blues music and learning. And in it, there was a session that was some strings musicians on mistake making. And I have been holding on to this sort of idea of like, if you play something so precisely, like, and you're just replicating exactly what's there, are you actually creative? Like, I I was sort of leaning to no. And that was solidified for me in this work because I had the opportunity to watch these 3 world-class strings musicians practice and then verbalize and think aloud their practice process. And one of them explained to me how, or to the group, how with every phrase, there are multiple different ways to achieve the phrase in the piece of music. And there are different ways that they could make those notes work based on the fingering and how they wanted that to look. And so what often when he would keep going and keep repeating is he was trying different ways to get at the same goal so that he could make this thin line piece of music a much wider piece of line to work on. And so that for this famous piece of music that has been played, tens of thousands of people probably for hundreds of years, he was creating space in the music to express it in multiple different ways. And I was like, that is creativity, right? And the actual precision of the instrument isn't the creativity. That is the creativity.
It's a beautiful example of the analytical and the creative coming together. You have to be able to execute analytically the technique for the painting or for the expression of music, but then I love that story, Tessa, the expressiveness of it.
Does the same principle apply if I play Guitar Hero?
Let's go with yes.
Yes.
I nailed it.
Yeah.
Definitely yes.
You guys touched on something which we were just starting to lean on, and I was like, oh, you guys know the next question, it feels like in my script. But I was interested on because you guys were just talking about it. It's not the barrier isn't capability. The barrier sometimes, is it the culture or is it the capability? And Rich, you started to touch on, actually, sometimes it's the environment and the culture that is allowing people to feel quite stifled in their ability for creativity. And as you were saying, Terentia, that you've had people in your team say, well, I'm not creative. And you might think, have you maybe not just felt safe enough to be creative or be your authentic self? Because we all must have started there when we were children. But I'd love to throw that question to the group and say, what is it about culture or fear in organizations that maybe hinder people getting the best out of their people?
I'd love to give you a response about the human, and then Rich, if you could dive in on the culture, because I feel like that's how generally our little tango. But on the human, so there are 3 core cognitive processes involved in creativity, and pretty much every human has them. So they are divergent thinking, which I often use the example of aerodynamics. So that's like lift, it's the hero, go up in the sky, great. But if your plane goes all the way up in the sky and it doesn't land, that's not great. So you also need another cognitive process that's called convergent thinking, which is about making things concrete, coming back to the ground, making choices, clustering things thematically, doing analysis, things like that. And then if your plane only goes up and down, right? So you only have lift and you only have gravity. That's also not awesome. You need thrust to move forward. And so that's executive function in this situation, which is planning, executing, holding yourself accountable, determining tasks and timelines and, following things through, all those kinds of skills. So every human, short of varying degrees, has these 3 core cognitive processes that they interact with and rely on every day. And so one thing that I find really helpful is that there's a lot of self-doubt about creativity, and helping people see that they have these 3 things and everyone has them can be really empowering. And, as a coach, I think often I find when I'm coaching in a classroom, even from the minute before, you can often find examples of them using those 3 processes and making that really tactile and concrete for them to say, hey, you know how you just did X? Well, that's this, and Y, that's that. But if that fails, another really good strategy here to help do that is to recognize which of those processes an individual is really strong in and tell them how that process is so important in innovation, and let them enter engaging in creativity and innovation through that strength that they have. And so I think that for me at an individual level is sort of one way to help move forward here.
Amazing.
I love that. I think that Tessa gave a great example of the environment that we create in the classroom, of noticing those moments for them to help highlight, and that helps to reinforce for them, because we operate within a system, and our culture in an organization is that system. And so the things that inhibit us from moving forward, that cause the innovation hesitation, start to happen before you do anything. Am I the person? Will I do it? All that barrier prevents the action. But the things that help to really dissipate it and attenuate out that hesitation are, you have to take action and get started. And so a lot of what our focus in the book, and a lot of what Tessa was just describing, is about how do you give someone a little glimmer of, hey, I did something and I learned from it and I was successful. And that you mentioned, Nate, the dopamine. And then I get a moment of mastery in doing that. And that, encourages me to keep going. You have to be active to start that cycle that helps you to flourish in it. And so you've got to get past this initial barrier of all these things trying to hold you back, and give small steps and little ways of getting into it. And that's why in our book, we talk about two concepts. One is moves, really breaking down the things you do to move your work forward into small pieces. So they're manageable, they're doable tasks that you can move forward. And we talk about approaching innovation in small steps, taking very small steps forward to start to build on that momentum, to give yourself those moments of successes and wins that start to compound. And I think if you imagine that across an entire organization, if everyone takes a couple small steps, you start to build a compounding, almost like compounding interest, but a compounding dissipation of innovation hesitation going away. And that is, I think, the path to trying to change a culture. Trying to edict from the top down that now failure is okay isn't going to get very far, because people aren't going to feel it. They're not going to believe it necessarily if that wasn't the culture there already. So I think it's about taking small steps to evolve it.
We have a joke that we call like stealth innovation.
Yes.
Because I think sometimes actually it's better to help get your team going than it is to like name, we're doing innovation. Like, and it makes me laugh, the amount of people that say to me, Tessa, can you help me? We have to come up with a business case for why we can do the innovation, and with what we're going to find at the end, and create like a product viability assessment of that, so that they'll approve us to start the innovation. And I'm like, that is not going to give you innovation. Instead, not naming it that and starting with these small things and helping everybody do a little bit is key.
That culture, that's the kind of systemic amplification of hesitation. You've got to prove that you're the people you can do it, prove that you know how to do it, and prove that you will do it before you even get started. What a hurdle. How could you even start being experimental at that point?
It's so interesting when you see companies put I feel like innovation is the value that everyone wants to put on the wall. And I'm like, it's okay for you not to be an innovative agency. If you're not going to encourage that culture or that environment, then why put it on the wall to begin with? And how do you encourage people? See, I have a question for you, because I think there's a cool part to this of what are the different types of hesitation you see from people that you're coaching? Because there's, and then I want everyone to chime in as well, but there's probably a range of reasons why the average person, probably the average listener, has decided, I don't want to speak up. What do you think some of those reasons for hesitation are? And maybe then leaders who are managing teams might be able to identify some symptoms.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the thing that comes to mind is this imposter syndrome that everyone carries, but nobody wants to talk about. It's the taboo subject. But from the research I've done, I feel when you speak about it, it loses its power over you, because it's actually holding power over you when you say, I'm not good enough, or if I'm going to fail, I will look, I'm incompetent, or I'm not actually qualified to come up with this idea. I'm not at the right level in the organization. I need to be a manager or a VP or a director to come up with an idea like that. Are you inside my head? Because this is what? I mean, the people we're talking to on a daily basis are telling us this, and we're like, what? What are you even saying? But I remember when I was in that position, at which we're looking at the different levels, when I first started as an engineer, those were the things that went through my mind. I'm saying these things now because I've got years now of experience. I had amazing coaches and leaders who invested in me, who helped me believe in myself and believe in the ideas that I put forward. Did everything work? No. But when they did work, people validated that. They kept encouraging that line of thinking. The ideas change all the time, but they encouraged me to think out of the box. So I think for me, it's, that fear of looking silly or stupid, or it's a stupid idea, it's a dumb idea. And so for me, when I started leading my team, I actually wanted to take the bull by its horns and speak about it and say, guys, there is no stupid idea. Let's bring it to the table. We came up with a crazy idea at the plant in Sweden where I was leading the team. Everybody was like, that's a crazy idea. And then a few months later, it got approved, which was great. A few months later, the head of supply chain comes and is walking through the plant and go, this was a really good idea. I'm like, okay, good. Because we all just believed in it. Yeah.
But when you said, not all of them worked, when one of them didn't work, did you look silly and stupid and incompetent?
No, because people understand, because we are working in environments where we're designing things where that does not exist. We're coming up with ideas to be more competitive than our competitors. We have to come up with different ways of doing things with little money, because money capex is not always available to buy all the big shiny machines, but we need to get productivity and efficiency out. So I think this is what I try to cultivate within my team, is to just try. I use the word try all the time. Like, just try. What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
You're hitting on a couple of the key aspects of being able to generate ideas and using constraints to help enhance that. And I love that. But to that imposter syndrome that you were talking about, has Tessa got a superpower for you in sort of what you said of noticing things and naming them that can really shift the needle on that?
Yeah, I suppose you're teeing me up on metacognition.
I am, yes.
It's funny because I am about to preach metacognition, and I will just also say that I to normalize it, I also succumb to imposter syndrome all the time, especially in academia and at the institution that I'm based. There's a lot of moments where I'm like, should I be here? I'm not sure. Like, I'm like a little girl from suburban Melbourne. What's going on? So I totally hear that. A tool that can be really helpful, aligned with sort of what you said about naming things, and that's helpful with innovation, to innovation hesitation, naming things. That's all from principles of cognitive behavioral therapy and reframing. And those kinds of strategies tend to fall under what we would call being metacognitive. So meta sort of is like above or self-referential to being cognitive, your thinking, your feelings, your actions. So an easy way to say that is, it's about noticing your thinking, your feelings, and your emotions, seeing if they're working for you, and then adjusting them if they're not. And so that really sounds like, T, what you did, right? You noticed that you were having all of this imposter syndrome thinking. So you noticed it, and then you named it. And you're like, this is imposter syndrome. And then you decided to change it, to reframe it, because it wasn't working for you. And you started to develop self-belief and navigate forward differently.
I love that you said that, Tessa. And I think it's this, we chat around this a lot in the leadership development and coaching, you guys do as well, but it's the ability to call out those emotions that are very primitive. That's why I wanted to identify a few of those things, which T, you did very well on what are those hesitations when you're fear of looking incompetent, and fear of causing friction and conflict because of what you have to say, and fear of breaking hierarchy. And it's funny because when you say things like that out loud and actually label it, it becomes like less of a big issue. And I've always, and I love that you've done it, and I'm sure everyone has in this room, because we've all go through imposter syndrome. And I think, I've said this on previous episodes. I had a great guest who came on that was like, it's a good thing if you're having imposter syndrome. Like, it means you're self-reflective and you're worried. And he's like, if you don't have imposter syndrome, you're probably a sociopath.
That's true, right? Like, so I think this is one thing that it's so important to hold on to, is that all of these things that we just mentioned, all of these cognitive biases and heuristics that we have, so tendency to favor the status quo, desire to maintain social cohesion, resistance of ambiguity, even things like confirmation bias, all of those things have two primary principles, right? To keep you alive and healthy and, existing as a human, and two, to minimize the amount of metabolic energy you use while you're doing it. So your brain is only 2% of your body weight, but it uses like 20% of our metabolic energy. So again, if we go back to our history as humans, we wanted to maintain metabolic energy because there were threats around us, like a bear that we might need to get away from, like literally, I suppose. And so we wanted to have these natural instincts and shortcuts that helped preserve our life and our cohesion and our safety and our security, while doing so in such a way that preserved our metabolic energy. So all these things are normal human things. The fact that you're feeling them actually is like your brain is working how it's supposed to. It's just about starting to recognize when it's helpful and when it's not, and starting to be like, oh, no, sorry, amygdala, this is not your time to shine today. I don't need you. Get back in your box.
I think one of the things that, having worked in a learning context for a long time, metacognition was maybe not as explicit, but something, and reflection was something that was like really built into what I did. But the key thing that Tessa really awakened for me was this concept of active metacognition, where you don't wait till the end and the debrief and do a retrospective, but that you're doing it in real time throughout the whole process. And so you can make adjustments and changes along the way, which are far more helpful. Of course, it's helpful to do it next time, but if you can tune into those emotions you were talking about, Nate, and feel those in real time and then make an adjustment, it's incredibly powerful to notice and name and make an adjustment in real time.
At Impel Talent, we've worked with thousands of people and teams. And one thing is clear. People don't fail because they lack ambition. They struggle because they don't have a safe, unbiased space to learn, reflect, and grow.
Most people are growing quietly, under pressure, and often alone. And they're asking themselves, how do I lead without losing myself? How do I guide others when I'm still figuring it out? How do I build confidence when everything feels overwhelming?
It's not that they don't care. It's that traditional leadership development isn't connected to real life. Leaders don't need more checklists. They need space to pause, think, and make sense of their experiences. Because when people feel supported and understood, clarity grows, confidence builds, and they show up more grounded and intentional.
That's why we built Impel Connect, a space for real leadership growth, real support, and real human connection. A platform that brings coaching, community, and development into one accessible place. Because growth shouldn't be exclusive. It should be available to anyone ready to invest in themselves.
So what are you waiting for? Join us at app.impeltalent.com. Webinars, workshops, coaching, and most importantly, community.
Impel Connect, genuine human connection in your pocket. I think a practical thing, and just to your point, Rich, running like long projects, right? People waiting till the end to celebrate and do a lessons learned. And we were running projects that were over 2-3 years. And I'm like, if we're going to wait till 2-3 years to like check in, what did we do wrong? Yeah, exactly. We've got one shot at this project. We're not going to have exactly. Exactly. We didn't have that. So we built in those milestones where we checked ourselves, like how are we feeling? How are things going? And, course correcting as we go rather than waiting, and also celebrating as we went. Like I love baking, so I would just bake cake and let's celebrate. Everyone loves cake. And so let's celebrate that milestone. We bought that machine or we just installed that. And it really kept the morale up, I felt, for these longer projects. And I think we're not doing these things because we're just running to get to the end. But actually, the journey is the best part. That's where all the learning is. And if we're not acknowledging it, this word innovation does not only mean, I'm creating something new, like a new process or a new machine or a new idea, but we adapting, and it's a continuous improvement sort of mindset, that Kaizen type learning.
Oh, I love this story of baking. I love baking too. And I have this like really strong memory of my very first job in corporate consulting. I used to bake and bring things in to celebrate. And I had a senior female leader at the time sort of tell me, like, if I wanted to be taken seriously, I shouldn't bake things and bring things in. And this really stuck, like it's one of those things that like sticks with you. So I now fast forward, I have this memory of sitting in class at Stanford and learning the foundations of mindsets, which is actually something we talk a lot about in this book. And one of the things that I learned about was about how environments can help cue mindsets. So different environments and situations can cue you to have a different mindset or approach to the environment. And that's why part of why space design can be so important. The thought that I had in that moment was like, see, the birthday cake cued a celebration mindset. And that was like literally what went through my head. So I love that you just said that, because I haven't even thought of that in a long time. But there we go. So the moral of the story is always make the cake.
Yep, both touched on something it led really well into our next point. We're in this world of like super uncertainty, right? And I think we were just chatting around the fear of innovation in the best of times, let alone in the last 10 years where we've had so much change and so much, we talk about leading in a VUCA world and the impact that's happening across organizations constantly. Now, I think if companies and people aren't willing to innovate in times of uncertainty, they're at a super competitive disadvantage. So I'd love to understand both the mindset and the organizational structure. I love that we've maybe identified our two experts on each, but how does this uncertainty, why is it impacting people's willingness to innovate? And I think, Tessa, you were just touching on it because like it's this environment that people are in that is now impacting their behavior and maybe even amplifying their fear. But why is it that when T and I are dealing with companies now where people are like in situations, even with companies that have gone for long periods of time and been very profitable, and all of a sudden they've been hit by something that is throwing them off keel. And now is the most important time to bring ideas to the table, yet that challenge is actually unsettling. Why do you think that is?
Such a good question, and such an important question, because I think for me inherently that makes me really sad, because the skills that we need to thrive in a VUCA world are actually completely aligned with the core skills of creative problem solving. The ability to navigate ambiguity, the ability to hold multiple things to be true at once, the ability to test and iterate rapidly and learn from things and adjust, the ability to transfer learning from one context and apply it to a novel one, and see the surface features and underlying structural similarities. All of those things are essential skills today, and increasingly so, and a core part of creative problem solving. And so when organizations tend to shield up and be resistant to innovating, what happens often is they shut down the practices of creative problem solving and innovation. And therefore, they're sort of cutting off their nose to spite their face, to quote my mother's favorite saying, because they're looking to contract and preserve and hold tight, and stopping the skill development and the skills of the workforce that they need to have the skills to be able to be successful. So that's just me saying a very long-winded way of saying I think it's such an important question. Honestly, I think that this really does come back to what a core part of innovation hesitation, which is cognitive caution. And that is this, like, these survival instincts. We have of the cognitive biases, we have like one particular one that's very strong, or there's a few that are very strong, but one of the ones that's very strong is what we would call as status quo bias. And that is like the tendency to keep things as they are, because if you keep things as they are, you feel like that's known and you can control it and you can manage it. And so you even see this, like a good example of this is that from my personal life is my grandmother. She lived in a house for 50 years. And when she got elderly, she didn't want to move out of the house because she knew the house. And so she felt safe in the house. And if she moved, it could be new and she could trip and it would be a disaster. So she didn't want to move. So she wanted to stay in the house. Fine, that's status quo wise, except that the truth of the matter was that the house was falling down around her. So even though she was trying to preserve the status quo was also disappearing. But this like natural bias that we have meant that she kind of wanted to stay in the status quo that was disappearing instead of, moving into a different thing. And I think that's a really apt kind of metaphor for what's happening right now is companies will go, oh, I'm aging. Something's different. I might trip. Okay, I'm going to stay in my house, in the house that I know that every square centimeter and every lip and every handrail, I'm going to stay here. But they're not really recognizing that like the house is literally falling down and, the house is no longer going to be like the house is not going to be the same house.
I think about this isn't a research-backed finding, but I think about it as we have a sort of ambiguity well within us. And if it gets full, we can't take any more of it and we shut down. And so, depending on the environment you're in, including your personal life, the corporate culture, the socio-political environment in the world, all of these factors, the more ambiguity that goes in there, the less you have capacity for this needed ambiguity to engage in innovation. And a couple of concrete examples of that with the status quo, one that we talk about in the book is the Kodak company back in the 70s had digital photography technology and tons of patents. But the status quo is to protect the film business. And they had the iconic downfall trying to hold on to that. And another tangible one that we saw is during the pandemic. We were in the middle of teaching a class. And when that class stood out, the students were the same. They were capable. They could do wonderful things. But overall, that class, we saw more struggle in there because we're asking them to engage in ambiguity at a time when the whole world was like, do I wear a mask? Can I talk to anyone? Are we all done? And there was so much global ambiguity that it was hard to engage with more. And so they did fine as a class and they learned, but we saw them struggle more. There was a lot more coaching and talking about things because we have this limited capacity for engaging with it. So as an organization or a leader, the amount that you can create order, regularity, role clarity, boundaries and conditions that take all of the day-to-day stuff and make it known and safe and get that off their table. And you're not wondering, are we getting performance reviews this week? Is it even going to happen this year? Like all of these day-to-day things, that's eating up your innovation capability if you don't get your everything in order and make it capacity for people to be in and engage with ambiguity.
And we're always talking about the consistent leader, right? There's people, because in these times of uncertainty, people are not sure which leader they're going to find in the morning. What side of the bed did they wake up on? Right? And so that's causing a stress in people to even just, have a simple conversation because they're not sure how that leader is going to show up. And so this is something we're teaching our leaders is to, be as consistent as you can. I do understand life is happening. It's not just stuff happening at work, there's stuff happening at home. But when you are in a leadership position, this is something you have to be mindful about. And it's not about pretending or just putting on a mask, but really being as transparent or being vulnerable with your team and saying, you know what, it's not a good day today. Something happened and I'm not at my best. And people understand, but I think if you, snapping at people, you trying to be defensive, you being defensive, and they just don't understand why. I think it causes, this the cracks in the psychological safety of those individuals.
Yeah, and I mean, you're adding to the ambiguity tolerance, right? Because, like, what am I going to get today? I don't know. Like, it's not good for someone to be ambiguous about their leader's leadership capacity and capability, right?
We were talking just before we got on about how in improv, if you're performing on stage, if it happens, the audience sees it and everyone knows it. Trying to pretend like that didn't happen is uncomfortable for everybody. I think the same is true of being a leader. If something is happening and everybody knows about it, acting as if there's stability as opposed to acknowledging the instability and what we're going to do about it makes a huge difference in the relationship you have, in the trust. Why is it not safe to say that this is going on increases that ambiguity and makes it less safe for people.
I think there's a large amount of stress, and these, in these uncertain environments and timeframes, people do things that are, I think we've all been there, where you've had tight deadlines and problems, and all of a sudden you do act a bit irrationally. And unfortunately, we've talked in our last episode around the ability for leaders to remain calm on the outside because of its impact on people's ability to innovate and drive improvements on the inside.
Just to jump on that, I have 2 young kids and have been engaging with Dr. Becky's information. She's got good insight. And she's, I think, got one of the keys that I think it works with kids and parenting, but I think it works in the environment you just said, is when it gets unstable and you do something and you have done something you regret doing, it was stressful and you've gone off track. It's so simple, but incredibly powerful to just own that and apologize. It is unbelievably relieving. And so I apologize to my kids all the time. I'm sorry I raised my voice. I'm sorry that I didn't, do whatever it happens to be. And I watch them transform and then re-engage where they maybe were like a little bit to themselves. That works incredibly well as a leader.
I think it's being able to call it out, and I've talked about it before. If you're like have personalities or problems, or your like emotions are evident or come across, or people can see it, be able to call it out and identify it, and again, as we've talked about, just make people aware that you're aware of it, can sometimes mitigate some of that effect that can happen when you're in those stressful environments, and to a degree, just be a little bit vulnerable. This has been terrific. I wonder if there's a simple mental shift that helps people approach problems more effectively. So we've talked a lot about people freezing or getting nervous, and we've talked through some of the reasons why that happens. But what's something that someone practically could put into a place to help address and have that mental shift independently? If someone was listening, any of our listeners today, maybe I'll start with you, Rich, this time.
That's interesting. I think everyone has the capacity to create incredible solutions and engage in innovation and engage that creativity. And so I think if I was going to have one thing, try something small. Just do a little bit and start to engage, start to build that momentum of active working to suppress the hesitation. It may be uncomfortable a little bit for those first couple things, but pick something small and get going with it to start to awaken it and show to yourself that you can have moments of mastery around it.
That's great.
I would say if you see your innovation hesitation pop up, like look out for it, and then just say hello. You can even give it a name if you want, and just be like, I see you. Hey, how's it going? I don't need you right now. I'll let you know if I do. And it sounds ridiculous, but the evidence in CBT around that kind of approach to anxiety, which is really what we're talking about here, is really effective, and it can be a really helpful strategy for things like this.
Love that. Because again, you like disempowering that thought, those negative automatic thoughts that come into the mind. You're like, oh, I see you, I hear you. I think that's really, really good. Really good. Love that.
One other obvious thing is you could get our book and read that. That's a simple task. It's very small. Go ahead and try that. So let us know if it works.
All right.
One.
We've talked a lot about the individual. What I would love to finish off the episode with is a little bit about what you can do as a leader to foster environments of creativity. We've chatted around some tools and tricks for how people can handle it. What do you think the role of a leader is in unlocking innovation if they're not the ones creating it themselves? And I want to make this a bit of a two-part question because we've mentioned the fact that innovation grows when everyone feels responsible. So how can leaders spark that mindset shift? I'd like everyone to kind of throw in on this, T included. But yeah, what's the role in unlocking innovation, and how do leaders spark that to ensure that everyone gets that sense of responsibility? Tessa, why don't you kick us off this time?
I think one important thing for leaders to recognize is that innovation hesitation exists sometimes and often independently of them. So what I mean by that is like it's not always their faults. That like it's society and human brains. Like innovation hesitation exists, and so I think it is their responsibility to help name it for their team and to help everybody know that, hey, we're all dealing with this. And so for us to unlock innovation as a team, let's try to keep each other accountable to recognizing when it's cropping up and to putting it aside. And I think sometimes leaders shy away from acknowledging it because they think it reflects badly on them. But I think it's really important to remember that this is sort of a thing that is existing in a person's brain in our society, independent of the manager. And yes, a leader can make it worse for sure. But also they can make it better. And one way to make it better is by naming it and holding space for it.
I think for a leader, you don't have a talent problem. Your people are fully capable of creativity and innovation. So asking, why aren't my people innovative may not be the right question. Maybe ask, what are the signals that the organization, the environment are sending that are inhibiting that creativity, that make it feel risky or illegitimate or too much of a burden to be able to do it? And how do you attenuate those signals to allow and create the environment, the place where that creativity can come out and it's safe to come out and play? And so you can do that with the processes that you have, or the structure or incentives that you have, or the culture and the values that you are propagating as a leader. Even the routines that you do. Are there, to use a very gross term, are there public flogging meetings where people present their work and it's torn down? Or are there public learning celebration meetings? Just a simple shift like that can create a routine or a ritual that helps to perpetuate it. So what's the container that you as a leader can help create?
That's a really good part. I mean, the thing that practically that I did with my team was help them connect the dots, because what I realized, people don't realize they're innovating. So because they think they're looking for the big things, the neon flashing lights, and actually it's in the simple things that build up and lead. And so even just recognizing it as a leader and saying, wow, that was a great idea. That's a great innovation. Like using the language, using the vocabulary, the words, and giving them that language and vocabulary and I'm like, oh, wow, that was really creative. So they start, also believing that they are creative, that they came up with a creative idea. So I think that reinforcement, that encouragement, the validation, some people need it, some people don't. I think I give it. One of my values is encouragement. So whether you want it or not, you're getting some encouragement. That is my general stance is encourager. So that's what I found. I see people's faces light up. Like, oh wow, really? Did you think so? And then the next time they feel more brave. They have the courage to try again.
Yeah, innovation doesn't have to be a moonshot. It can be a roof shot or a cloud shot. And those are fantastic innovations. Jump shot. Yeah. Add those together and you get huge, huge amounts of impact.
When we think about that as a culture, what do you think you were mentioning it, Rich, about the habits and rituals. What are maybe some habits and rituals that someone could take away today? If we were starting from ground zero, let's say a leader is in a very fearful environment, what's a lever they could pull tomorrow to start to drive those behaviors in the right direction? You were mentioning don't implement flogging meetings. If anyone was, don't pick that up from this session.
I just became aware of recently, and it seems like it's a fairly established thing. I'll use the child safe word of this, but they're called F up nights, and that that organization gets together and everybody from the top down puts up their biggest F up and then says what they learned from it. And I think that's a critical piece. So if you could,
there are a lot of schools that do this too. They call them failure celebrations, and they like bring the parents in and the kids like celebrate risks that they took in learning.
I love
Yeah, it's really
that.
cool.
Oh my God. What school does that? That's incredible.
There's quite a few around the Boston area that do them. Yeah.
a similar concept, we used to have our students do a failure resume where they listed all of the key failures they'd had over a period of time, like a resume. And then the key piece again, what did they learn from it and what are they doing differently because of it? And so anything around that, whether that's like a monthly meeting where you celebrate failures and the learning from it, or you have people do a resume, shifting that really is it's a big culture shift. It signals to them what we value is experimentation and learning, and it's okay. And we are not talking about celebrating when you accidentally do an existential error on the company. We're talking about safe intellectual stretching of failure where you're trying to do things that are innovative is the place and that's what we're really celebrating. That's one concrete thing. There's lots of forms you could use that in.
Really love that. Terentia, do you see some of that in some of your coaching? Are there sort of tools that someone could put in place? Because I know you've come into a lot of companies more, I don't want to say recently, but over the years where that bit has been stifled, and you've talked a lot about psychological safety. What's something that's a tool that you might recommend to a leader to say, implement this? It doesn't have to be massive. I love what you said, Rich, but try this for size to try and get people to feel more comfortable in that environment.
Absolutely. I think the thing that comes to mind is them role modeling what they want their teams to do. So them trying first, leading from the front and showing, I tried this didn't work. And the more they showcase that that's okay, people start seeing that it is okay, that that's the environment my leader's trying to create, because they're not shying away from that failure. And so, that's okay for me as well. Because it's like, kids and parents, they are learning and copying the things you do, whether you like it or not. You're under the microscope. And we always say this to our leaders as well. You're under the microscope, whether you like it or not. Whether people can see you, you think they can't see you, but they can. And so, they watching your body language, they watching your behavior, they listening for what your words are saying and what your body is saying, because sometimes those two are conflicting. And so then you actually lose trust when those two are fighting each other. And so these are the things, leaders can be mindful of, is to really just genuinely come up with ideas, share maybe their thought processes of how they come up with ideas themselves as well. Because sometimes people just don't know where to start and how to start. So, running maybe a workshop and sharing with them, what could that look like? And really just breaking it down into these small steps that you were saying, Rich, that build up like Lego blocks over time. And it's not that, the big things, let's all these little things add up to something amazing at the end, and the organization, the team, everybody benefits.
Absolutely.
Would you add anything to that, Tessa? So this will be our final question to wrap up. This has been amazing. Any last thoughts on that, or do you think?
I mean, I think that that's it. That's the show.
I see everyone's eyes drifted towards the time, so don't worry. We've kept two legends way longer than we need to. It was delightful. I have to say thank you both for coming on the show and sharing what you have to in this area. I have found this been such an illuminating episode. I hope that people who have listened in can take something away from this, whether to implement an innovation culture within your own team, or whether you as an individual can pick up some of these practical tools, apply them to everyday life, and hopefully foster more innovation. Fail fast. I always said that to fail means you're trying and you're actually doing something. And it's funny within organizations when people don't do anything, and I'm like, just fail and do something. Something that we're moving towards.
Do anything.
That's right. But guys, how can, for anyone who wants to learn more, I know you said you didn't want to do too much of a shameless plug, but you guys have both recently co-authored Innovation-ish. Do you want to maybe tell our audience a little bit about that and how maybe they can get a copy, or if they want to reach out to you, how they can get in contact with you?
Absolutely. We did publish a book from Wiley. You can find it most retail outlets, Amazon and books, Barnes & Noble, independent booksellers especially, we like to promote. You can reach us both on LinkedIn, and please do reach out with questions, or, we are happy to have a conversation back and forth with you.
Well, guys, thank you so much. Everybody, we hope to have you back next week. We will be back at our regular time, our slot, which will be at midday in the UK in a live episode. We made a special exception for these two amazing guests. Tessa,
Thank you.
Rich, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for joining us for our latest episode of Breaking the Chain. If you'd like to see more episodes, you can check us out online at www.impeltalent.com/podcast. And if you'd like to perhaps put a question into us or be featured on one of our next episodes, you can email us at info@impeltalent.com. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.